all good, all good.
Hi everyone, welcome to Talking Mental Health. This is episode number 13. Unlucky for some, but not for me and my guest today, who is Mr. Tim Jones. How are you, TJ?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on, mate.
Mate, appreciate you coming on. As always, appreciate everybody who takes the time to come on and talk about mental health, because it's a difficult thing to talk about and not everybody wants to do it. So I appreciate you being unlucky number 13, as some might go for, but not for me. Not bothered.
No, I'll pass on that. It's I'm not superstitious of other things, superstitious, but not 13.
Brilliant. Do you just want to introduce yourself a little bit, TJ? I know you've just made a bit of a move up north, so I'm just going to let you kind of explain it so I don't get anything wrong.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Recently moved to Scotland. Those who know me will know I've moved around a lot in the last few years, but took on a PhD opportunity at the University of Stirling, which I'm absolutely delighted to be here to take on. And then, I'm a football coach by trade, coach educator. Just finished my master's at the University of South Wales. Originally from Jersey, haven't lived there for about 12 years, something like that. So, been a bit of a nomad, but hoping to settle a little bit here and really push my academic studies forward.
Nice. And we met, obviously, in the States, 10 years ago? Probably, I don't know, what was your first year out? I lose track of years now. I can't remember. I met so many people.
Yeah, I agree. I'm the same. I think my first year out in the States with you was 2010, but it might have been 2011.
So, somewhere about 9-10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, memory, getting old and all that. So first question, I ask everybody this: what has life been like for you since March the 21st, since lockdown came in the UK? What's it been like?
Yeah, it's really changed. I mean, as you gave me opportunity to say there, I've made a move, which might have been partly, prompted by COVID, really. I was in the States, actually, working for a different company in South Carolina, beautiful place, Charleston. And when COVID hit, we went on furlough. Was very fortunate to be looked after enough, to stay in the accommodation that I had. The club I was working for were fantastic. They really supported us as staff. To be able to go and do like one-to-one training and stuff like that. And, that obviously gave the kids an opportunity to get out and be physically active as well. So it was a scary time to start off with, but one that worked quite well in my favor in the end, until, it really became very clear that I was going to need to find other employment, change of direction again. And as you well know, as a football coach, that happens a lot. You have to pivot a lot. And it's not something that many people outside of that industry, sports, football, whatever it is, really understand. It is difficult to find full-time work that lasts a long time. So that was really one of my motivations for taking on the PhD. I've always been academically inclined. And with the successes that I had on the MSc, it was really the decision that I made. Whether it will work out remains to be seen, but that COVID was definitely part of that need to pivot. And thankfully, I've had a lot of experience at that over the years.
Yeah. That's. I didn't realize you were still in the States when all this started. I thought you were back in the UK. So you've gone States, back over this way, and then up to Scotland within the space of 6 months?
Yeah, and before anyone gets upset at that, I did quarantine when I got back. I played by the rules, but I actually moved to Bristol. I had secured a couple of pieces of work whilst I was in the States. I was due to work for the FA as a tutor for the second time, and for a private company. And then hopefully, I used to work for Bristol Rovers in the academy there. I was hoping to either go back into that academy or another academy. And unfortunately, really due to COVID, especially with the FA, we're seeing loads and loads of redundancies, changes in programs. And I was kind of, last in, first out, and I wasn't actually kicked out necessarily, but it was very clear that the work wasn't going to be what I anticipated. That's not their fault. across the board. So again, pivot, having decided to return from the US before I actually needed to take on employment, both of those are gone. So then managed to get the PhD application to come up to Scotland. Obviously delighted with that, and tried to sort out as much as I could before moving. And the job that I had lined up, that also disappeared.
Right.
So by the time I actually got here, I've just been in a little bit of limbo ever since. And I think, I'm not unique. There are thousands and thousands of people in my industry alone that are going through this.
Yeah, it's a tough time for everybody, but like you said, you've got to just try and make the best of whatever is available to you. And it seems like you've got a nice path now to go forward, so that's good for you. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
You said earlier you grew up in Jersey. Just give us a flavour of what that was like, because most people I've had on the podcast either grew up in the UK or like on the mainland, or they grew up in the States. So what was life like on a little island for you?
Sure. Look, it's not that much different.
No.
There are definitely peculiarities to growing up in an island. I would consider myself very privileged to have grown up in Jersey. It's a beautiful place, particularly in the summers. I spent a lot of my summers with my brother bodyboarding on the beach, and it was warm enough just about for that. We'd have a summer that lasted more than a couple of days, which sometimes is the case in the UK, in the mainland. But also, opportunities to travel across to France, which is so close. But Jersey life definitely has its peculiarities. And in the winter, for me, with the exception of obviously football and playing football and training and coaching, it just wasn't really big enough for my ambitions to be a full-time football coach or a full-time educator. There was never going to be enough around for me. And that's a bit of a shame, because, my family are still back in the island. I do love the island dearly, and I would love to go back, but, it just didn't make sense in terms of my professional ambition.
Yeah. And did you jump from the island to the mainland as what were you, a teenager? Were you a little bit older, a little bit younger?
Yeah, I went straight to university. I actually took a degree called Music with Computer Sound Design. I have a Bachelor of Music that I've largely failed to use since graduating. I was a good musician. It runs in my family. My mother was an incredible musician. But it was never really properly a passion. There'd be a lot of the time where I was probably supposed to be in lectures and I was playing five-a-side football. So it became clearer later down the line that I'd maybe not made a mistake, because I learned a lot through that process. That was in Surrey, in Guildford. So went from secondary school straight to there. After graduation, I traveled to Colorado and did 6 months as a ski lift operator. Terrible job, brilliant opportunity. Snowboarding for 6 months. I had a great time. And that was really largely about growing up, escaping a little bit. Back to Jersey, got involved in finance. That's what most people do in the island. There's a lot of my friends that work in the financial districts, financial industry. And then, later down the line, through my volunteering as a coach, decided I might actually be quite good at this. I'll give it a bash. And that's when I went over to the US and met yourself.
So was that the start of your coaching journey when you moved to the States and started, with ukulele? Was that the start, or did it start a little bit before that? And just, you said volunteering there. Yeah,
it started a little bit before. So my brother is also a football coach, and it's really his fault that I've had this career. So a big thank you to him. He coached a couple of female teams, adult female teams, and I would just sort of assist as a teenager. And then I took over a team that then promptly disbanded about 3 months later. So that could have been very much the end of that. I took over another team who, I was going to be working as an assistant coach, voluntary, but another female adult team. And he promptly left. And the ladies kind of turned to me and were like, well, you'll take it on, right? I don't think I had my level 1 at the time, not even a level 1. And thought, well, okay, yes, I'll give it a go. And I mean, they were just a wonderful bunch of people, brilliant players. I'm so glad that they were my players and I wasn't coaching against them. But we went from being sort of perennially third at the time in the league to having in my second season, we were completely unbeaten. And that really gave me the confidence to think, actually, I might be quite good at this. And I actually hadn't even finished that season by the time I came out to the US in March. We'd already secured the league, but there was a cup competition that we were in a final of, and bless him, my brother stood in and managed that game for me. And much to his relief, I think, won the game.
Wow, yeah, it's a big deal. Like, you know, you get a team to a cup final. Then I know, you know, it was a big opportunity to go to the States, but to miss that final must have been hard to kind of watch it and learn about it from abroad. But you know, your journey to the States, was that an opportunity to learn and grow as a coach? Was it a case of, I want to get away and just experience? You know, I know you said you've been to Colorado, but did you want to get out and live in the US for a little bit longer? Was it a little bit of both? What was the reasoning for making that transition?
Yeah, bit of both. Exactly as you say. I mean, I would say that I was still on that adventure. I definitely have adventurous bones. I'd say that's runs in my dad's side of the family. And so it was partly adventure, but it was really, can I be a football coach full time?
Right.
That was the challenge. Can I do that? And I mean, truthfully, I went for the interview with UK Elite in Loughborough. I think I actually turned up late as well because the flight was delayed. So that was a great start. And I'd applied for just the summer, 2 months for the summer. And they offered me a 9-month contract. And it was, okay, well, life really is going to change in the next few months. You know, one of the stipulations was that I had to be a driver. And I didn't have a driving license at the time. I rode a motorbike. And I left it all the way till, I think, about 2 weeks before I was due to fly out to the US. I took my driving test. And nothing like putting yourself under pressure. But no, it was really about challenging myself to see if football coaching could be my career. I didn't know what it was going to look like. It was going to be this awesome sort of hidden adventure. But yeah, it was tough to leave the ladies team behind, but they were good friends as much as they were my players as well. And they really understood that this was an opportunity. And I'm grateful to them for everything that they did for us.
How many years did you spend in the States? You remember?
So UK Elite, I did 2 9-month contracts. Then I was going to be going back, but I decided that I needed to go back to university. I needed more qualifications behind me as a coach within coaching science. So I applied to the University of South Wales. I was supported by my godmother, and thank goodness she did, in the process, and got on the bachelor's degree there. Knew I was going to be going there from that September, so that would have been 2013. So, you know, I spoke with the UK Elite staff and just said, okay, well, I can do a summer. I can't do a full 9 months, and they took me on for that summer. So, laboured answer, sorry. 2 sets of 9 months, 1 summer contract. So 2 and a bit years.
Yeah. And then did you continue coaching when you went back to uni? Did you carry on coaching in South Wales, or were you back in Bristol then?
No, South Wales yet. I was living in South Wales, a place called Treforest. During my 3 years, I took on all kinds of different jobs and coaching. I started by volunteering for an academy development centre that was on campus, which was brilliant because I didn't have a car. So that was working with a Cardiff City ADC. And then that progressed. I was playing for one of the university teams, one of the men's university teams. I then knackered my ACL, as you do, and became coach, basically, following that. So men's coach, then women's coach for the first team at the University of South Wales. I was under 16s coach at Monmouth Town, which was crazy because it was an hour away. But we did it anyway. And then eventually, through contacts via some of the coach education I've been through, and then crucially meeting the head of the academy at a free conference at UWE University in Bristol, I ended up interviewing, applying, and getting a job with Bristol Rovers in the foundation phase there. So at one point in my bachelor's, I had 5 jobs plus the bachelor's. I then went into an internship that was ultimately going to pay for my master's, but was working for the university within what's called the EFL Trust program, which was a combination of administration, organization, but also then opportunities to deliver some stuff on what the FAW calls the C license. So that was a good mix for me. But again, I was doing 4 or 5 jobs. Once a month, I was going to London to work for an incredible organization called Football Beyond Borders, where I was head of coaching. And they were fantastic with me. They really understood that I had to be flexible. But basically, once a month, I was going to London. So there was these crazy situations where I was living in South Wales, working at the university, which was around the corner, but then coaching at Bristol, which occasionally then you might have a game in, say, Bournemouth or Plymouth or Portsmouth, and these far-flung places, and then working in London at the time as well. Amongst that, I was a bar supervisor for the Principality Stadium, just hospitality. So rugby internationals, I would go and do that work. So again, crazy situations where I would cycle from home, take me an hour to get to the stadium, work for a 12-hour shift, sleep for 3 hours, get up early because we got a game in Plymouth, drive to Bristol on the bus, game in Plymouth, back on the bus, drive home. And then the next day I'm driving to London. So it was crazy, but I'm so grateful for the opportunities I had, because it really means that I gained so much experience in such a small space of time, but it was a crazy existence.
I was going to say, yeah, you were smiling the whole time you were talking about all those different things. But in my mind, I was thinking, is he smiling because he enjoyed it? Or is he smiling because he's thinking how crazy all that was in such a short space of time?
I don't know whether it's slight sort of sadistic, but no, I'm smiling because I did gain such a great deal out of it, despite the fact that, I definitely had a lot of stress through those moments. And then, there did come a time where it became too much. It absolutely became too much. And it's not like anyone hadn't said either. Whenever I tell someone about those situations, or rather I was telling people when I was in those situations, everyone would say, well, that's just nuts. What are you doing? But the fact is, as you well know in the football industry, it is extremely hard to find full-time work. It's even harder to find full-time work that pays reasonably well. And amongst those 5-6 jobs that I was doing, I thought it was the real crux of it was I remember I submitted my tax form, and I think I earned something like 11.5 grand over the course of the year. And it was like, okay, well, have I reached a point now where the experience no longer outweighs, what effect it's having on my life and my mental health and my physical health at the time. And that was really the beginning of decisions to go elsewhere to find employment opportunities that just fitted better.
Yeah, because I know you've done a lot of work recently about burnout and stress, because as you're talking about all those different things you're doing there, you're traveling to London and Plymouth for a game and back to Wales, and there must have come a point where you just hit a wall and thought, how can I keep going here?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. With the masters that I took at USW, there was a module called the Football Coach's Psychologist, which was brilliant. But as part of it, we looked at coach burnout, and I think that that part of the module was really to look at supporting other coaches. But then for me, it became much more about self-awareness of my situation. I'm bloody minded. I'm stubborn. Once I'm within a situation, I will see it through, and that was part of it. But yeah, there was this inventory, a coach burnout inventory that has 26 points on it. I think it's Professor Olastuga. I may have got that wrong. But I identified with 25 of 26, which was a real eye-opener, especially given that the 26th was being pregnant. So, that wasn't something I was going to be experiencing, but it really made me take stock, and I was really affecting some of the people around me, not negatively necessarily, but I wasn't as available for them. I didn't really have a proper social life. My social life was all of the different peers and colleagues that I had, and I loved engaging with them so regularly. But actually taking time for myself, the relationship I had at the time, it was non-existent. So it was really a tough time and a real eye-opener that I'm actually doing myself a disfavor here.
What was on the list of 26? I know we've talked about this before, but obviously being pregnant is one, but you can't experience. But what were some of the others that were on there that people may not be aware of? If someone's out there who's coaching, feeling a little bit tired and a little bit burnt out, what things might they be experiencing so they can actually realize, maybe I am a little bit burnt out here.
Yeah, lack of sleep was one. I mean, not that I'm particularly good at it now, but it would take me an hour, 2 hours to fall asleep. So sleep hygiene was definitely one of them. And that's just because your mind is buzzing with everything that you've either just done or that you're doing. Your physical health in terms of, I was eating really badly. My diet was dreadful. And that was more a case of, I just need to grab stuff on the run. But also when you're tired like that, both mentally and physically, you're not that likely to pick out the good foods, the things that you actually need.
Yeah.
The brain immediately goes to, I can remember sitting in my car about to get out to do a training session. And I think I had a Starbucks coffee, one of those like pre-made ones, half a Red Bull, a Snickers, and like a sausage roll or something like that. And then I go out there and I'm working with, effectively young professional athletes. This is nonsense. Like I'm not living to the values of, what I certainly wouldn't tell those kids that was appropriate.
Yeah.
But at the time it was like, well, I've only just got here. I didn't have time to really sort myself out. But at the same time, starting to take responsibility for it. And that was the big thing. That, okay, I was going through burnout and I needed to be gentle with myself in terms of not kicking myself for that. But at the same time, I now needed to take responsibility for that situation. And that's really what I did. And unfortunately, that meant if I wanted to continue being a football coach, that I would have to leave Britain. And once I'd sorted that out and everything that meant, the relief was massive.
Oh, go on. You said you left Britain to kind of give yourself that release and just to kind of slow down a little bit and give yourself, I guess, breathing space and give your mind a little bit of time to just come back to some sense of normality. What was the next step, and how did you go about getting yourself back to a level where you felt like you were still coaching, but you were yourself again without actually driving yourself from A to B and back again 10 times a day?
Two things really. I mean, I moved to Saudi Arabia. I was working for Arsenal Soccer Schools that then became Juventus International Academy. So look, they're franchises. and I was started as lead coach, became senior coach quite quickly as the program grew massively. But there were two things that changed for me. I suddenly had time, and I had good finances. You know, I mean, look, as soon as I say that I've been to Saudi Arabia, people will think that I was on crazy money, which I wasn't. But just the fact that I had full-time work where I knew that wasn't a problem. And I knew I didn't have to juggle other work alongside my studies. You know, half my time that I was spending was, okay, well, I'm with Football Beyond Borders for this week, so I need to tell the other 4 jobs that I'm not going to be there for that week. And then I've got a session there, so that means that I can't actually go and do that shift with the hospitality company, which means I'm losing 120 quid out of that. So I've got to make that up somewhere. So maybe I'll go and do a day's work, you know, cleaning glasses and putting it out on tables. I suddenly didn't have to do all of that juggling of my life that, you know, in terms of friendships and relationships at the time, they just weren't, I couldn't consider them. Couldn't. You know, if I caught up with friends over the phone, I was quite lucky to do that, really. You know, there was just no room. There was no room in the calendar. And again, really had to take responsibility for that. You know, I'd created that. You know, and that was partly because I was chasing what I was chasing, but I'd created that situation. I didn't have to do that. You know, I could have done what a lot of people do, which is, you know, part-time work for a company, and then they're part-time coaching on the side, and they hope eventually through their licenses and experience that they will get a full-time role. And, you know, a lot do, but it's so few and far between. The way I was looking at it was I needed to gain as much experience as quickly as possible so that I became a more attractive prospect. So moving away from Britain, moving to Saudi Arabia gave me that headspace. Unfortunately, what happened is that as the program grew, I mean, it really tripled, maybe even quadrupled in size. I was then managing a lot more. I was required to do a lot more project management, marketing, budget management. And people who know me, I've no interest. I've no interest in that side of things. You know, I'm a football coach and a coach educator. That's what I wanted to be doing. And unfortunately, the friction between myself, my manager, and the company at large just continued and continued. So it was no longer the right place for me, which was a bit of a shame because it was a good project. I was working with a couple of people who I consider to be very, very close friends now. So certainly gained a lot from it, but unfortunately it didn't last.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because you just mentioned there, you know, you're working with a couple of people who you became very good friends with. You know, when you were at USW in was it Glamorgan? Is that where you were?
Yeah, so it was the University of Glamorgan when I applied, and then by the time I actually started studying, it was University of South Wales. But yeah,
right.
Glamorgan.
So just thinking, you know, you said you were doing all that coaching while you were doing your degree, and then all that just kind of, you know, burnt you out, and then you ended up moving to Saudi. On a personal level, what was that like, you know, with friendships, with relationships, with family? Because that's not an easy thing to do. You know, you're working essentially 5 jobs while you're doing your degree, and then to give yourself an escape from that was to move essentially 3/4 of the way around the world, where you probably didn't know anybody when you moved there.
Yeah.
That must have been tough on a personal level.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I mean, I had experience of making that jump previously that obviously helped. You know, I knew I could do it. But it also relieved me of the spiral that I put myself in as well, you know. So I'd rather use the word relief rather than escape, because I don't think it was escaping. If it was escaping, I would have maybe had more drastic actions. But no, you're right. I mean, it's, you know, it was an undertaking, and with having lived in so many different countries and moved around, it has meant that some of the close friends that I had growing up in Jersey, I just don't speak to now. we've gone in different directions. And actually, some of my closest friends from sort of my sixth form time, we've all done quite similar things. There's very few of them actually in Jersey now. They're all, a lot of them are flung around the world. So, maybe that's why we were friends in the first place. You gravitate to people that you're like. So no, I take your point. It was an undertaking, but I think because it was such a relief to take myself out of that situation that I just wasn't controlling anymore. It didn't cross my mind that much.
That's fair. Was it a big adapting process to live in a country like Saudi Arabia? Because obviously very different to what it's like here in the UK and in the US. What was that process of I guess an induction and adapting to that situation like for you?
Yeah, I mean, a hugely different culture, a different lifestyle. I was really fortunate to live and work in a couple of compounds. The one that I worked in is this beautiful haven. You drive into it after going through 20-foot gates. You've had to show your passport 5 times in order to get in. But I mean, you could have been in Miami. Just the way that it's built, it almost felt like either an army, sort of like an army living base, or maybe even a college, American college style. There's palm trees around, and the houses all look the same, and they're massive. And unfortunately, I didn't get to live there. That's where I worked, though. Where I lived was a place that's like, it's the size of Washington, D.C., but there's only like 7,000 people in it. And that's largely because, and this is the case in places in the Western province of Saudi Arabia, that you got these beautiful buildings and right next to it, absolutely derelict, completely derelict, for another 500 meters, 500 yards. And then you've got this other beautiful building alongside it. So, very much a sort of, not a developing country, you can't say that, but developments happening a lot, certainly whilst I was there. But the difficulty, Joe, was social again. It's so hard in a place like that. The compound I lived in, I was living on my own, which was good for a while. And then you just don't socialize in the same way. I mean, you don't go to the pub. There's no, obviously, so there's not this, they don't gather in the same way. They're more likely to sit around having coffee. Fine. But then, unless you're meeting with more expats regularly, then you don't have chance to have that social connection. So that became tough after a while. And amongst that and the changes in what was expected of me that weren't part of my job description or what I really wanted from my career, that unfortunately meant that I had to go.
What was the next move after that? I feel like you're like a game of chess. There's just constantly different moves after that.
Yeah, I followed a colleague, another very good friend of mine. I followed a colleague to Charleston in the US, which, as we said, that that's where I came back to for Bristol. And I was working for a company that is sort of semi a franchise for Bayern Munich, and then through COVID and various other things that are publicly available, the company's no longer in existence. So there were various things that were a problem. Last December, I really started to have a physical manifestation of some of those stresses and things that I'd been through, which was just heart palpitations. Wasn't anything more than that. Very scary at the time because you don't know what it is. But essentially what they found just was that cortisol levels were high. My resting heart rate was a lot higher than what it would normally be. And as a result of that, I really had to reconsider again. And so I need to slow down again. In the football industry, you can so quickly be building someone else's dream. You can so quickly be taking on everything. It baffles me sometimes. You speak to some of these people working in grassroots, and the amount that they take on as a volunteer. alongside their family and their job. I mean, it's staggering. They're incredible people. It does baffle me. So again, it was a bit of a wake up. Having done that work previously, known that I'd gone through a bit of coach burnout, I again put myself in that position where I just, once again, just wasn't taking responsibility for protecting myself. And it's simple things that I do now, of more mindfulness, of taking moments at the end of the day to be grateful, taking moments at the beginning of the day to meditate, to be really mindful of what I'm eating, exercise. These are all things I knew as a coach, and I would spout as well. I would tell others, but I wasn't doing them for myself. And I think that there is a difficulty when you do work as a coach, or you're working with others, you're developing others, that you forget to take care of yourself. And of course, the big thing is that if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not actually really helping those that you're working with either, because you're not presenting your best self.
Yeah, that's so true. And all that stuff, you mentioned there, the meditation, the gratitude, stuff like that. Was that something that you decided you had to start doing when you came back to the UK, or were you kind of doing that? I know you said last December, your heart palpitation. Was that when that sort of journey started of, look, I know I'm not taking care of myself here. I'm doing all this for other people, but I have to kind of come within a little bit and just actually make sure that I'm the best version of myself to then go out and deliver what it is that I'm supposed to be delivering.
Yeah, the cycle I would go through is really look after myself, get back to feeling really good, and then, this isn't normal. So I'd drop off back into, the other habits and taking on too much and working too late and all that stuff. So it would kind of cycle around. It would be, right, I'll end up basically ill. I'll look after myself really well. Okay, I'm in a good place now. I'll go back and, and it just continues like that. So these are things, meditation, these are things I've dabbled with for a long time. And dabbled with really is the right way to call it. Would note that I'd feel better and then inexplicably just not do it anymore. And, some of that is down to self-discipline. So at this stage it was, and I think it's part of growing up, of course, and being a bit more mature about it. It was a real disciplined decision, intentional decision. I am going to do these things regularly because it is so clear that I will be better for it. And then, one of my MOs is to have as much of a positive impact through my coaching, my coach education, the academic work, as I possibly can. And if that's going to be the case, then I've got to be well. And it's, once you start looking for that, you start meeting people and you start seeing things, that information comes to you more often because you're more aware of it. You're paying attention to it. And that information, those types of people just started flooding into my life. And it's through that, really, that constant reinforcement of those things that means that now, I have the occasional blip, but I'm more disciplined to consistently do them. And the changes to my mental health, my physical health, my productivity, despite being someone who I would pride myself on being very productive very often, my productivity is even better.
So you feel like you are now consistent with it, and with that you feel better and you can give more of yourself to not specifically people now, but to the projects that you're actually taking care, involved with.
Yeah. It's clarity. Clarity is the main one, and it might be as simple as supplements as an example, just becoming more aware of what do I need in my diet and am I getting it? And if I'm not, and there are certain things that I need, then how do I get hold of that and which ones? As an example, ginseng. I've been taking that for 6 months, and look, maybe it's placebo, but I would suggest after 6 months that I think we can put that aside. But the difference in clarity now in terms of my thinking and concentration, there's a definite difference. Had I not bothered to take the time to inform myself of that and to find out what was going to fit for me, I wouldn't be in that position.
And are you a physical person as well? Do you go out and run? Do you cycle? You know, can you switch off in ways like that, or are you more just get into a quiet space and just go within your mind?
A bit of both. I run most days, sometimes better than others. You know, like a lot of football coaches, I've got knee problems, but that's an excuse. But you know, it for running for me is about I mean, obviously getting the endorphins and getting the physical returns, but I'll always have headphones on. I'll be listening to podcasts, listening to music's a big part of my life. I'll be listening to music, and it's just a real opportunity to go, right, I am doing nothing other than this right now. And it's compartmentalizing. That was what was so important for me in the last year or so, is stating moments in the day, I'm just doing this. And it was so tough to begin with because I'm so used to juggling so many different things. I'm so used to having this monkey mind of this project, and I've got to remember to call that person and speak about this and write this down. But even in those moments where I would try to meditate or I would try to switch off, it just wasn't happening, or it would take forever. So what was really necessary, and I took this off a podcast with Gary Vee, where it was, could you at least take an hour a day where it is just about you and just about what that thing is that you're doing? Everything else goes away. And it takes time, it takes discipline. Certainly when I started, very, very difficult. But now, because I'm in that little bit of a habit, that hour a day, whenever that is, that I've put aside, I can forget about everything else. Because I've been really dedicated as to, no, hang on, that's time just to do these things.
And have you had your hour today? Is it scheduled in?
Yeah.
Have you already had it?
Yeah, I had it this morning. Yeah, thank you. No, it's usually a morning thing for me as I wake up. And I just find that helps me really be intentional with what I'm doing throughout the day.
Brilliant. Mate, I think that's amazing. I think it's good. Clarity was the word that you dropped in there. I think that's so important. I think now, you know, like you said, monkey mind, you can have so much going on and I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to finish this and start that and call this person and ring that person and email that person. You can almost drive yourself crazy with putting so much pressure on yourself. So I think it's really good. I like that, just having an hour, 24 hours in a day and just one for yourself, just dedicating 1 hour.
It sounds crazy, doesn't it? 1 hour, you take eight hours away for sleep, let's say. 8 hours away for work or whatever it is that you're doing. You've got several hours left over. What are you doing with that time? And it's so easy for us to fall into habits of TikTok, binge watching episodes. And look, I've been guilty of this in the past, of course. Some of those books that are on the shelf up there are more aspirational than anything else in terms of actually getting to read them. So it's changing those habits. And for me, it was this really weird situation of, I knew all of it. I'd either read it or people had told me, or I knew it, all of it. And I would advise others of it. I wasn't doing it for myself. And like I say, taking responsibility for it was a really important, pivotal moment for me.
That's really, that's really good. So I guess we'll finish on, give us your like specifically for you, what works best for you when you just need to, in that hour, I know you do it in the morning, or if you're having a busy time and you just need to switch off, what's the best thing that you can do for yourself to just completely separate yourself from work and madness outside?
Guided meditation's been huge for me. I use an app called Headspace, which I'm sure many people are aware of. For me, I have tinnitus from my time or failed time as a professional musician. But I have tinnitus, and I am prone to this monkey mind. So trying to do meditation where you're just quiet and there's no noise just didn't work for me. Whereas then being guided through that process, where there are moments of calm, there are moments of silence throughout that, but you have this voice that takes you through it, that was huge. So that, they usually last about 20 minutes over the app. So I do that, and then some form of exercise, usually running, within that hour, and then I'm good to go.
Brilliant. Well, mate, I appreciate you coming on. I know it's a busy time for you, so thanks for taking time out of your day to come and sit and chat and give us some value and insight into what it is that you've been doing and where you're going. So I hope it all goes well, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, no, a pleasure, Joe. Always good to speak to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, TJ.